In this video, we're going to hit the highlights of setting up a Gen 1.3 drum unit. While it's definitely not rocket science, there are a few steps that if you miss or do out of sequence will cause you to backtrack and troubleshoot. We'll give you some pro tips for those. Before we dive in, the most important piece of advice we can offer is to pull up the Gen 1.3 setup checklist on your smartphone and read through the whole thing first. When you're on site, just step deliberately through each step in the correct sequence. The link to the checklist, MistAway.com/90100, is printed on a sticker inside the lid of the black plastic housing that protects the unit. A couple of important steps happen before you set up the unit. So we're going to start with step -1, selecting a suitable location for the drum unit. The unit needs to be located on a flat spot where it's accessible and where it's not going to be sprayed by the sprinkler system or hit with sheets of water from the roof. It also must be near a GFCI outlet with a cover. The power cord on the unit is 12 feet long, and you should never use an extension cord to reach the outlet. The unit needs 120 volts and requires a 15 amp circuit to operate. If there is insufficient voltage, which is likely to happen if you use an extension cord, you will have problems. The motor may overheat and the agitation valve may not open, which means the unit won't mist. Here's a pro tip. Check the voltage at the outlet with a multimeter before setting the unit up. If the voltage is less than 120 volts, the homeowner will need to call an electrician. Now that we know where the unit's going, let's talk about step 0, assembling the unit. You'll need to turn the unit upside down to insert some lines and to bolt the unit to the drum lid. Find a flat surface where you can comfortably work, and then put a towel down so that you don't scratch the plastic housing. If you don't have a towel, you can also use the shipping box for the unit to protect it. Invert the lid, place it over the unit, then rotate the lid until the holes in the lid line up with the fittings. Here's a pro tip. Insert the pump intake line, the agitation J tube, and the auto drain line before you bolt the unit to the lid. The diameters of the lines are all different, so you can't mistakenly insert a line into the wrong fitting. Make very sure that the opaque white PEX pump intake line is securely seated in the intake fitting. Press down firmly until you feel it seat, then pull back on it to make sure. If it's not seated, the pump won't be able to prime itself, and you'll have to pull the lid and unit off the drum and seat the intake line after you discover that it's not pumping. Now place and hand tighten all 4 bolt nut connections between the lid and the unit before using a nut driver to tighten them. Finally, make sure the filter on the intake line and the auto drain valve on the short length of black tubing are securely in place. Now place the lid assembly onto the drum. You'll probably find it easier to handle the whole thing if you grab the assembly under the chassis rather than holding the sides of the lid. Then secure it with the gray drum ring. Here's a pro tip. Although it's done both ways, we recommend adding water and concentrate to the drum through the bung in front of the controller, rather than offsetting and balancing the lid assembly on top of the drum and risk it falling in, which it can. Use a pair of channel lock pliers to remove the bung cover from the drum lid. Now it's time for step 1, to make sure the system is assembled correctly and will spray. Then you'll visually inspect the nozzle circuit for leaks. Go ahead and connect the nozzle circuit to the 1/4 inch bulkhead fitting on the misting unit. Insert the tubing into the fitting and pull back on it to confirm it is securely in place. If you've installed a zone kit, connect both nozzle circuits. Plug in the unit and confirm that the controller boots up. Now partially fill the drum with water, adding about 12 to 15 inches to the bottom of the drum. Here's a pro tip. To test and inspect, you'll put some water in the drum, but don't add any concentrate yet. You're going to be confirming that the unit is working and then walking the nozzle circuit, and you don't want to be doing that with insecticide coming out of the nozzles. If you've got a 125-gallon drum unit, you'll need to set the tank size, T and K, to 125 in the setup menu. If you have no idea how to do this, be sure and watch the Navigating the Controller video in this section of MistAway U before you attempt your first setup. Tell the controller that the drum is no longer empty by entering the maintenance menu and setting the level gas gauge to 1 or 2 bars. Now run an inspect cycle from the maintenance menu in the controller. The display will flash INS and you'll hear a click as the agitation valve opens. Watch the pressure gauge. The needle will be at rest until the lines are filled and then rapidly rise. You should see the nozzles misting. The bypass on the pump is set at the factory to produce about 250 psi on a 40 nozzle circuit. If the pressure gauge shows much less than that, you probably have a good size leak. Now go walk the nozzle circuit and look for leaks. You may need to run several inspect cycles as you find and repair them. If you've got two zones, you'll need to inspect both nozzle circuits. If you only see INS rather than INS1 and INS2 in the setup menu, the controller doesn't know the zone kit is installed. Reboot the controller by unplugging it and then plugging it back in. The controller will recognize the zone kit when it reboots and present the correct menu items. Here's a pro tip. If you've installed landscape risers and trenched for tubing, don't bury the lines until you've hooked the unit up and inspected the nozzle circuit for leaks. Here's another pro tip. When it comes time to program the controller, you're going to need to accurately enter the number of nozzles on the circuit. They are easier to count if they are misting, so count them while you're inspecting. Once you're certain the nozzle circuit is in good shape, remove the plastic plug that covers access to the pump bypass and run another inspect cycle. Use a flathead screwdriver to adjust the bypass so that the pressure gauge reads 250 psi. Next, if you've got one, you should install the canister-style nozzle circuit filter. It has an element inside that will prevent the nozzles from clogging. It is much easier and much less expensive to occasionally replace that element than it is to replace a bunch of clogged nozzles. So you really should have one on every system. You'll first assemble the bracket to the head of the filter like this. Here's the pro tip. Fill up the canister with water from a hose and then screw the head back on before putting the filter on the drum. This will ensure that there is no air trapped in the canister that could cause it to rupture or even explode when the system pressures up. Now, snap the filter bracket to the lip of the drum using both hands, like this. Then cut and connect the tubing, making sure to follow the direction of flow arrows that are molded into the filter body. Now it's time to orient the handheld remote transmitter to the receiver in the unit and test it. The unit won't respond to a remote mist if the system mode is off, or the nozzle count is 0, or the remote mist duration is 0. So set the system mode on the home screen to auto every day, set NOS in the setup menu to the number of nozzles you've installed, and set REM in the setup menu. 45 seconds is a common duration. You'll need the handheld transmitter for the next step. Enter the setup menu and put the receiver into learn mode by selecting LRT and then holding the green button down for a couple of seconds. A countdown will start. Now use a paperclip to press the recessed pairing button on the back of the handheld transmitter. Here's the pro tip. Don't hold the pairing button down or it will go into another mode. Just press and release it with the paperclip. You'll know you've done it correctly if the blue LED above the button flashes a few times and the controller displays done. Pressing the mist button on the transmitter completes the pairing. Now let's test the remote by pressing the mist button again. An LED on the transmitter will light, indicating that the unit received the signal, and you should hear the agitation solenoid click, see mist on the controller, see the needle on the pressure gauge move up, and see mist coming out of the nozzles. You can stop it by pressing Stop Mist on the remote. You may have the leak detection option installed on your unit. You'll need it if you plan to install MistAway remote monitoring. It works with a flow meter installed here in front of the motor by comparing an actual flow rate to a target flow rate, and it's valid for nozzle circuits with 12 or more nozzles. You can confirm you've got leak detection by looking for LD in the data menu. The value will be on if you've got it. There's also a label on the box the unit was shipped in. It's a good idea to test the flow meter and to be doubly sure that your nozzle circuit doesn't have a leak that you didn't notice before. Press mist on the remote transmitter to run a mist and let it completely finish. At the end of the mist cycle, if you see error 3 in the display, you probably have a leak. To be certain, clear the error by holding the red stop button for a few seconds and run another remote mist. Now it's finally time to pour in the concentrate and finish filling the unit up with water. Make sure that the concentrate you're about to put into the drum is on our approved list. If it's not, it may damage the equipment or may not be legal to apply through the system. You can find the list on Tech Self Help. For the most common formulations, you'll add a half gallon of concentrate for an initial fill. However, that's not the case with all the approved concentrates. You should check the label or look at our approved list for the recommended dosing. Now is a good time to take the adhesive-backed label that came with the concentrate and stick it to the side of the drum. It's required by the automated misting language on the label, and it's important that you do it. After adding the concentrate, fill the drum with water to about 3 inches from the top of the drum, so that when the unit agitates, there's no chance the fluid will get pushed through the holes in the lid and get into the assembly or controls. The final task in this step is to reset the gas gauge tank level in the maintenance menu to full. Now let's enter the mist cycles. First, confirm the day and time shown on the controller home screen are correct. If not, change them. Now set the desired mist cycles in the cycles menu. A pretty common misting program sets cycle 1 to a morning cycle, say 7 a.m. for 45 seconds after the sprinkler system is run, and then a dusk cycle, say 7 p.m. for 45 seconds, and a third cycle around 11 p.m. for 45 seconds. You won't go wrong with that. There are other parameters in the setup menu that you'll want to set if you're installing a wind sensor or if you want the unit to agitate prior to a remote mist. Otherwise, you can safely accept the defaults. There's a complete list of these in the controller menus article in Tech Self-Help. If you've made it this far, you can do your happy dance and button up the unit. Make a final confirmation that the system mode is set to auto every day, and then put the cover on the unit with the elastic at the bottom of the cover underneath the lip at the edge of the drum.